Hello F1 fans! Welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with myself, Harry, David and Vasco, and in this episode, we're going to discuss the 2024 season finale, which was the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
We can proceed with the practice sessions. In FP1, we saw a lot of youngsters, and we also saw a different driver for the whole weekend for Alpine. That was Jack Doohan, who Alpine decided to put instead of Esteban Ocon for the last race of the season.
Yeah, in terms of pace, we saw McLaren were very, very strong throughout the entire weekend. They were 1-2 in both FP2 and FP3. So, and with the championship lead that they had, it was really looking good for them. And in terms of other teams, we also saw good pace from Ferrari, Mercedes, and really not a Red Bull, though. They were kind of nowhere throughout the weekend. But it set up an interesting qualifying session, and I think it definitely didn't disappoint. Also, we had the news that Charles Leclerc got a 10-place grid penalty for changing his battery, which was also something to consider regarding the championship battle. But yeah, on to qualifying.
Well, for qualifying, we saw something really interesting with Hamilton, who was 18th. We saw Jack Doohan at the back of the grid, so not very impressive first weekend for him in Alpine, but we'll see for the next season how he's going to perform in that car. I also want to mention something strange. Checo Perez got to Q3, which never happens. His last race, hopefully, for the team, and he was again on point, being P10.
And he was actually out-qualified by Valtteri Bottas, who was P9. Actually, Sauber got into Q3, it was very impressive. Also, Nico Hülkenberg somehow managed to go into P4, but then he received a 3-place grid penalty for impeding during qualifying, and he dropped to P7. And otherwise, at the top, it was a McLaren 1-2, which showed that they are ready to win the Constructors' Championship on Sunday. They were in a very, very strong position after qualifying.
Also about qualifying, we had these situations where laps were deleted and reinstated, which I think is the first time, personally, that I've seen this in F1. And Charles Leclerc, unfortunately, though, he did not get his lap reinstated in Q2, and with his penalty after getting eliminated in Q2, started at the back of the grid.
And we can move on to the podium places from the race. And third place for Charles Leclerc, second place for Carlos Sainz, and first place for Lando Norris. And we had 4 DNFs: Checo Perez, Franco Colapinto, Valtteri Bottas, and Liam Lawson.
Well, before we start discussing the race, David raised an interesting point with quali laps being deleted and after that reinstated, which is something very interesting regarding FIA and their decision making. And after the Las Vegas Grand Prix, as we discussed, the race director was switched. Do you think that for the next year and the upcoming seasons, they're going to be new approach regarding penalties, regarding time lapse, quali laps being deleted, and after that probably revisited and put it back?
I think that, the new race director, who is Rui Marquez, he is very strict by the looks of things. He's been giving out so many penalties in Qatar, Abu Dhabi as well. And I think this could actually trouble the penalty point system, because a lot of drivers are going to rack up, I think, a lot more penalty points like this. Max Verstappen, he actually has 8 himself. So 4 more penalty points and he could get a race ban like Kevin Magnussen got, as we saw. I think it's concerning, but I think it's interesting, and it kind of raises, I guess, awareness to the drivers that they should be more wise when making overtakes or things like that, because the penalties have become more severe. I have not seen a 5-second penalty ever since the new race director came. It's just straight away 10-second penalty, 20 seconds, stop-go penalties. He's going crazy with the penalties. So I think it's definitely interesting to see how this will develop in 2025 across a full season rather than just the end of the season.
Well, really interesting to see what is going to happen, but we saw a lot of drivers suffering from decisions made in the past few races. Especially in qualifying, it was, let's say, this time for Leclerc's lap and last week about Verstappen 1-place grid penalty. So it is really interesting how this is going to turn out, because after all, rules in F1 are up to the decision of somebody else, or they're pretty much subjective. And depending on who decides matters, it is going to be like really, really confusing probably at points, like what decision is going to be taken.
Yeah, that's why I think that there should be certain strict guidelines and rules, because otherwise, in certain occasions, it seems unfair when a penalty is given. For example, Lando Norris's 10 seconds stop and go penalty in Vegas was just, in Qatar, sorry, was ridiculous. I mean, it was too much for, I think, almost everyone that I have asked.
I wanted to bring up also something that was really annoyed me across the whole season, but actually has not been talked about by like anyone in like the F1 media. It is the fact that in qualifying, the cars are parked in the pit lane and they are not going when it's a green light. I mean, there should be like a minimum speed, because there are cars at the back of the line that wait for over 2 minutes just to get out of the pit lane because people are making gaps. For like clear air, but you're blocking the entire pit lane and there are so many cars behind. I think they need to make some kind of regulations about this, because this is ridiculous in my opinion. And I mean, like, the cars should make the gaps on track rather than in the pit lane, because there are other cars behind you that are waiting to get going. I think it's ridiculous. They're just crawling out of the pit. Some are even just parked there for like 10 seconds after another car has gone out in front of them.
Yeah, this creates problems for certain cars because they don't have enough time to start their lap. Like when the time runs out,
we saw this with Mercedes actually. They like Lewis Hamilton. He crossed the line with like 2 seconds to go and he was like behind like a train when setting his final lap, which is why I believe he got knocked out in Q1. So I really hope they fix this, because it's honestly ridiculous.
Absolutely. And now I think we can move on to the race. And with the start of the race, we saw a really, really interesting battle for second and third place. Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri, which collided. And actually the consequences were worse for Oscar, as he was left at the back of the grid after lap 1. And for Verstappen, he managed to stay, help me with this, was it like P10, P11, something like that?
Midfield,
yeah, which is a serious loss of around 10 places, but still he managed to come back to the race. And actually in the end, even though he didn't have the most impressive race, he managed to finish P6. And for Oscar, he only managed to get 1 point, which still at the end was enough for McLaren to grab the championship. But it was not the best race for Oscar. And at the same time, he didn't have, I think he had like zero fault for this accident with Verstappen.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I was disappointed with his comeback drive. I kind of expected more in that McLaren. But yeah, Max, the way he actually like saved the car and like made it like a perfect 360 was perfect for him to continue. Piastri a little bit more unlucky. Luckily for Piastri though, Lando Norris managed to hold the lead for the whole race, so it didn't cost them. But it was definitely concerning for McLaren fans after turn 1.
I also now remember that Piastri received a 10-second penalty for colliding with Colapinto. Yeah, he like ran into the back of Colapinto and they gave him a 10-second penalty for that.
I thought that was such a strange penalty. Yeah. Nothing even happened. It kind of reminded me of the Bearman one in Brazil, where he also ran into the back of Colapinto actually and got a penalty. I don't know why, I don't know how, but FIA, they're harsh on their penalties.
After that, we can move to Charles Leclerc and his redemption from the back of the grid. And even though he, at the beginning, I don't think he was looking that stable, but after that, with the race progressing, he managed to climb up the ladder. And in the end, he managed to get P3, which is impressive, even though Ferrari didn't manage to secure that first place in Constructors' Championship. Sainz and Leclerc were looking alright this weekend, and that is why Ferrari got double podium. So, like a respectable, in my opinion, final of the season for them, even though it again ended up being disappointment, as they didn't manage to secure any of the 2 championships.
Yeah, Charles Leclerc, he gained 11 places on lap 1, which was incredible. It's one of the best starts I've honestly seen in a while. And then that overtake he made in the chicane around like 3-4 cars around the outside, I thought was amazing. One of his best races of the season. Shame it didn't really matter. He also got to P3 without even any safety car, which I think is even more impressive. But yeah, Carlos Sainz, P2. He had a good race. I think it was about what I would expect from Carlos Sainz, but I think if it was Charles Leclerc in that position, I think he would have challenged Lando Norris. And that's actually what it came down to for the championship, because had Carlos Sainz beaten Lando Norris, Ferrari would have won the championship. I mean, Leclerc couldn't do more than P3 from the back of the grid. But Carlos Sainz he was close, but in the second stint, he kind of fell off from Lando Norris. And Lando really had a flawless race, honestly, really impressive. And I think overall, at the end of the day, McLaren did deserve this Constructors' Championship across the entire season.
Yeah, I also want to talk about another driver. That's Valtteri Bottas. He started P9. And then on the first lap in the chicane, he tagged Checo Perez. And that's when Checo's race ended. He had some damage. But after that, he had a big collision with Kevin Magnussen. I think he lost the brakes in the chicane, because from what we saw on the onboard, he braked early, but then just the brakes didn't work, and then I think his steering broke and he just had to retire. But it was a sad ending for Valtteri Bottas and his Sauber stint. What do you guys think?
Well, it was sad. I think the whole season was pretty sad for Valtteri Bottas with that Sauber, even though he wasn't the worst throughout the season, just the car. And I think at one point his motivation really dropped, and we saw it that even in his last, for now of course, race in Formula 1, there wasn't anything super flashy apart from the qualifying session, and he had some problems. He got Checo Perez out of the race after that, as you mentioned, the brake failure, and just things weren't right for Valtteri Bottas this weekend. And we saw a very sad, in my opinion, last race to a driver who actually got a lot out of the sport, but also gave a lot to the sport. And yeah, his Mercedes stint would never be forgotten. So I think Valtteri Bottas again deserves respect in his last race in Formula 1.
Also, shout out to the 5-place grid penalty that he got for a race that may not ever happen. He joins Jenson Button in that aspect after Monaco. But yeah, Valtteri, he had a miserable race. Terrible start as well. He lost 5 places, which was really disappointing. Another person that had kind of a miserable race was Liam Lawson, who I think was running okay, but the RB team did not put the tire on. And what's worse is Liam Lawson noticed this in the pit box, and he stopped to wait for them to finish it, and they were like, no, go, and then the tire immediately just goes off at the exit of the pit lane, and he somehow got back to the pits, which I thought was incredibly impressive. They never got a penalty for this, the team. I realized it was under investigation. They didn't even get a fine or anything. It's they forgot about this. But yeah, that was disappointing for Liam Lawson, and he ended up retiring towards the end of the race. I think he had an engine failure. I saw smoke out of the back of his car.
The interesting part again is for Lawson or Tsunoda, or they can decide to stick with Perez Red Bull. But still, in the past few races, I think Yuki Tsunoda has been a bit more consistent, and I'm looking forward to the decision made by Red Bull, who is going to be in that second seat the next season. But going back to the race, Oscar Piastri, after the crash we talked about, he managed to overtake a few people, and in the end he managed to secure P10 finish, but he managed to save his car, I think pretty not impressively, but more luckily, and he was pretty close. And actually that happened in a few moments during the season, and I think that there is something specific about the driving style of Oscar, especially getting out of some of the turns. He's not always that stable with the car, so I think that may be something that he should look for throughout the next season, because yeah, he has been pretty consistent. I think he's the only driver to finish off the races throughout the season, but if he wants to be the main guy in McLaren, then mistakes like that and unfortunate events should be much more or less for him.
I want to talk about somebody who we haven't mentioned so far, and that is Lewis Hamilton. He had a great race actually, because he started P16 if I'm not mistaken, and he managed to avoid the chaos in lap 1, he managed to gain a lot of positions, and then by the end of the race, he was catching George Russell by 1 second per lap, which is a lot. He was very fast, and that's like the culmination was in the last lap when Hamilton managed to catch him and overtake him around the outside. It was a great ending to his Mercedes stint, I think.
Yeah, he was actually the only driver on the grid that started on the hard tires and the hard to medium. That was actually great strategy. He was in clean air for a lot of the time on the hard tires, and yeah, it worked really well, and he showed great pace and showed that even though it was his last race for Mercedes and the Venera, he still, I think, has that drive in him to perform to the best possible ability, and we'll see how that continues next year. But yeah, we already briefly mentioned it, but yeah, McLaren managed to seal the Constructors after Lando Norris's win. Also, shout out to Pierre Gasly for clinching single-handedly that P6 for Alpine in the Constructors. Another great race in Abu Dhabi, P7 in the end, even though he was in P3 at the start of the race, right? He had a great start, but the faster cars at the end of the day were going to prevail. But Alpine actually did not mess up the strategy, and he managed to crucially beat Nico Hülkenberg. Not that it really mattered because Haas needed to gain. They were down 5 points going into the weekend, so it was tough for them in the first place. But Pierre Gasly, really strong end to the season, really impressed with him, and he kind of salvaged really the whole season for Alpine. And it's a shame for Haas, who, in my opinion, were much more consistent and I would say deserved P6 more. I believe they finished in the points much more often than Alpine. It's just that Brazil result especially really boosted Alpine. A shame for Haas, but considering that they finished last in the standings last year, I think P7, first year for Ayo Komatsu, is pretty respectable in my opinion.
And for Pierre Gasly, also shout out for him for managed to secure P10 in the championship. And a bit sad for Nico Hülkenberg, who was I think best of the rest driver for the whole season. And I really hope to see him perform at a very high level when he moves the next year. But for Gasly, it is becoming pretty interesting because for Alpine, I don't think they're going to be great the next season or after that, but Pierre Gasly is securing his spot as the new king of the midfield. Let's call it like that. And I'm really interested to see if there is an open space in one of the bigger teams once again, even for second driver, whether somebody is going to gamble on Pierre Gasly in the future. But let's move on to, we briefly discussed it, but overall, not the new regulations, but the new decision-making process from FIA and the new race director. What do you think about it? Because we saw some pretty controversial decisions. How do you think this should be approached? More liberal or more conservative?
I would say the only thing this worries me is wheel-to-wheel racing, battles getting ruined from these penalties. But I mean, the FIA have done it before, but I just feel like the penalties are starting to give out are just extremely harsh, very serious penalties that, 10 seconds is a lot of time in F1, and even for something like Piastri, he barely touched Colapinto, in my opinion, and he got 10 seconds for that, and there was, no damage there. Actually, no, okay, Colapinto had a puncture, but it looked so minor, and I didn't even think it was even going to be a penalty, and I actually even thought Colapinto was even more to blame because I thought it was a break. He broke, too early or something like that, but the new decision-making is, I think, alarming. I think it'll be more alarming for the drivers that they'll have to deal with this, and they seem stern on their decisions, and yeah, I think it will definitely cause some controversy in the future. Hopefully it does not ruin races, but for now, I'm okay with it actually. It's been okay, and I think the drivers will learn more from their mistakes and face true consequences.
I agree with what you said. I don't have anything to add. I already said it, there should be a certain set of regulations, and that's what it's necessary for FIA.
They should just have, if you do this, it's this penalty. Because, for example, I think it was in Qatar, but Lewis Hamilton sped in the pit lane, and he got 10 seconds. And I swear before that, I've only ever seen 5-second penalties for that. So it's you should just have, speeding in the pit lane, this penalty. Causing a collision, this penalty, and so on and so forth. It's simple. I don't know why it's so complex, and they do it based on I guess, circumstances. But yeah, they should make it more clear for everyone.
Well, we'll see how they're going to approach in the next season. I think we can move on to the fun rubric and let's see what was your highlight of the weekend.
For me, it was Hamilton's last race for Mercedes, as it was a memorable one. He managed to make a great comeback, even though his qualifying was poor. Still, I think it was a nice send-off. I also enjoyed the radio message at the end. It was very emotional.
Yeah, Lewis had a great race for sure. My highlight is McLaren winning the Constructors, even though I'm a Ferrari fan, and I was disappointed that they didn't manage to win it. McLaren were great this year, and yeah, this is their first championship Constructors since 1998, which was incredible. And also, just considering where they were at the start of 2023, they were the worst car. After Saudi Arabia last year, they were 10th in the standings on 0 points. And now they're sitting here not even 2 years later as Constructors champions. Amazing job by Zach Brown, by Andrea Stella, who came into that team last year and totally transformed it into a championship winning team. Incredible. And two great drivers, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, both had incredible seasons in my opinion. And overall, their upgrades were really good, just like last year, except they started off much better this year. And this proved to be a factor because this was one of my concerns going into the season. They managed to overcome it, and here they are now, Constructors champions.
Shout out to Lewis, of course, his radio message in the end, him managing to overtake George Russell with an impressive manner at the end of the race, and also him doing donuts, of course, with the Mercedes. But also my highlight is McLaren's Constructors. After 26 years of waiting for the McLaren fans, they finally managed to do it. Their car was great throughout the whole season. As David mentioned, they had a really, really, really strong upgrade, and also the whole management of the team, the two drivers, everything was working smoothly for most of the season, and I think they deserved that title, and I think that title would be a great stepping stone for them in the upcoming seasons.
I absolutely agree. And we can move on to the surprise and disappointment of the weekend. The surprise for me was Pierre Gasly. As already mentioned, he had a great end of the season. He was very strong, always in the points. And I was really impressed. Let's see if he can keep up this form in 2025. And the disappointment, as already mentioned, Valtteri Bottas, not a great way to finish off potentially his F1 career.
My surprise of the weekend is Charles Leclerc, who had a miserable qualifying in that grid penalty, but incredible race. It really got overshadowed by the fact that Ferrari lost the Constructors, and he even really couldn't celebrate this result. I thought this was one of his best ever drives, honestly. It was really impressive. It really reminded me of Sebastian Vettel at Abu Dhabi in 2012. Very similar race, I think. And my disappointment is actually Max Verstappen. I know he's already the world champion, but really clumsy move into turn one. Honestly, I was very surprised by that. And his pace throughout the race, he was kind of nowhere. He finished 12 seconds behind the Mercedes, which was really not impressive whatsoever. And he was kind of nowhere. Finished 50 seconds behind Lando Norris as well. It was not Max's day. Obviously, he didn't really care, but still, I would say it was a disappointing race from him.
For me, again, Pierre Gasly was the surprise of the weekend. In the past few races, actually, he has been pretty impressive, pretty surprising, in my opinion, and he has been carrying the whole Alpine team on his back. And again, another great qualifying session. He was P3 after turn one, and in the end, he managed to secure P7 and managed to put himself at P10 and Alpine at P6. So I think absolutely deserved surprise of the weekend because he was pretty impressive. And my disappointment is Haas, but not as their result or what I expected from them. I think it is more like the disappointment that Haas have after the last few races of the season and after that race especially, because things weren't looking that bad. Yeah, even if they didn't manage to secure that P6 position, things were looking alright after great qualifying session from Nico Hülkenberg, after not that bad of a race overall for him and K-Mac. And in the end, Kevin Magnussen was taken out by Valtteri Bottas because of the brake failure. And Nico Hülkenberg, he was P8 after Pierre Gasly. And everything was, even though Haas were consistent throughout the whole season, everything just didn't come together at the end of the season. And I think they should be disappointed of how things turned out. And for Nico too, he was P10 for a lot of races. And just Pierre Gasly had a few great races, and in the end they were well, P11 for Nico and P7 for Haas. Just really sad to see that hard work from them in the end not paying out really.
Well, I think this is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode, which will not be a race review since the season is ended. But till then, like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
If you no longer go for a God that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.